The moment before the crack. January 27, 1944. 5:18 hours. Stalag Luft 3, Sagan, German-occupied Poland. The wind cuts first. Then the silence. It hangs over the compound like a held breath, sharp, metallic, unforgiving. Frost clings to the barbed wire in white veins, every strand glittering under the arc lamps. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, a guard's boots crunch against frozen gravel, slow and bored, the sound carrying farther than it should in the pre-dawn dark. Inside Hut 104, men are already awake. They do not speak. They barely move. Wool blankets are pulled tight against ribs that haven't known proper food in months. Breath fogs the air in thin, controlled clouds. Every sound matters here. Every cough is measured. Every shift of weight rehearsed. A British flight lieutenant stares at the ceiling, counting the seconds between footsteps outside. A Canadian navigator presses 2 fingers into the floorboard seam beneath his bunk, feeling for vibrations. An American bomber pilot watches a crack of light slide across the wall as a guard passes, rifle slung loose, confident. Too confident. The camp is a geometry of control. Watchtowers at fixed intervals, floodlights angled inward, double fences threaded with warning wire. To the guards it is perfect. A machine that cannot fail. A place designed not just to hold prisoners, but to break the idea of escape itself. The prisoners know this. They also know something else. 5 minutes later at 5:23 the roll call whistle shrieks. Sure. Commanding. Unavoidable. Doors slam open along the hut line. Men pour out in ordered rows, boots crunching snow, shoulders hunched against the cold. A Feldwebel barks commands in German, his voice cutting through the darkness with practiced authority. He has done this every morning for months. So have they. Routine is the real prison. At the edge of the Appellplatz, a young German guard, barely 20, leans against a post, stamping his feet for warmth. His helmet sits slightly crooked. His rifle hangs loose on its sling. He glances at the prisoners not with hatred, but with the smug detachment of someone who believes the war is already decided. One of the prisoners catches it. Just a glance. Just a posture. The guard laughs at something said behind him. A joke passed between uniforms. He turns his head for a fraction of a second, grinning, and says it out loud, loud enough to carry. A careless sentence. A throwaway line. A last joke meant for no one who mattered. But it is heard. Not by one man. By several. They do not react. Not yet. Eyes forward. Hands at sides. Faces blank. But something shifts in the air, subtle and irreversible, like the first crack of ice on a river that has held all winter. Because the joke is wrong. Wrong in a way only prisoners would notice. Wrong in a way only men who have studied the camp, measured it with footsteps, memorized it by shadow and sound, could understand. Roll call drags on. Names shouted. Numbers confirmed. A guard curses as ink freezes in his pen. Another adjusts a floodlight, angling it back into place without checking what lies beyond its cone. Beyond the wire, the forest waits. Dark. Dense. Silent. Back in Hut 104, after the prisoners are dismissed, coats hung, boots shaken free of snow, nothing is said. Men sit. Some smoke. Some pretend to read. Some lie back down as if the morning has changed nothing at all. But under the floor the sand is disturbed. A tin can shifts slightly in the darkness beneath the boards. A rope of braided cloth tightens imperceptibly. A mental calculation is revised. The joke is replayed again and again, not for humor but for meaning. It's timing. It's confidence. The assumption buried inside it, that no one on the other side of the wire could possibly understand what it revealed. At 6:02, a senior British officer adjusts his cap and moves to the stove. He speaks casually, eyes unfocused. Cold one, he says. A nod from across the room. A pause too long to be accidental. By 6:11, the camp has returned to its usual rhythm. Guards pace. Prisoners queue for thin coffee. The illusion of control reasserts itself. But the balance is already broken. Because somewhere between arrogance and routine, between a laugh and a careless word, a weakness has been exposed, and men who have waited years for such a moment have just been given permission to hope. Hope is dangerous here. And by nightfall it will become deadly. The realization. Midday settles over Stalag Luft 3 like a lid. The sun rises just high enough to reflect off the wire, never warm enough to soften it. Guards rotate shifts with clockwork precision. At least that's how it's supposed to look. From the towers, binoculars sweep the compound in slow, lazy arcs. From the huts, men watch the watchers. Inside Hut 104, sound is the enemy. A chessboard sits between 2 bunks, pieces frozen mid-game. No one touches them. A kettle simmers on the stove, its lid rattling softly, masked by the wind pushing against the walls. The smell of weak coffee fills the air. Ordinary. Safe. Forgettable. That is the point. Near the far wall, 3 men sit close without facing each other. They do not whisper. They speak to the room, to the stove, to the chessboard, anything but one another. Their words are meaningless on the surface. Lights off by a foot today, one says, staring at the window. Wind shifting, another answers, tapping ash into a tin. The third doesn't speak at all. He listens. Reconstructs the morning. Replays the joke not as sound but as implication. What the guard assumed. What he revealed without realizing it. Because it wasn't just arrogance. It was timing. The floodlights. The head count. The way the perimeter was trusted more than it was tested. Outside, a patrol cuts across the compound earlier than usual. Boots crunch. A rifle but knocks against a coat button. The prisoners barely glance up. But the third man tracks the distance by sound alone, counting steps. When the patrol passes, he exhales through his nose. What? That confirms it. At 13:40, a Red Cross parcel is issued. Men line up, hands outstretched, faces carefully neutral. Chocolate. Cigarettes. A tin of cheese. Currency in everything but name. Trades begin immediately, silent, efficient, rehearsed. A bar of chocolate disappears into a coat pocket not for eating but for leverage. Leverage is everything. Back inside the hut, a floorboard is lifted just enough to slide a palm beneath. The sand below is cold, packed tight, smooth flat. Whoever worked last did a good job. No loose grains. No fresh marks. That too matters. The man replaces the board without a sound. At 14:12, a different hut reports a sick man. A guard enters, impatient, checking for tricks. He finds none. He leaves annoyed, boots echoing. Another assumption reinforced. Nothing ever changes here. By 1500 hours, the camp looks settled. Safe. Controlled. But the realization has already spread, not by words but by behavior. Men linger where they usually move on. Others volunteer for tasks they once avoided. A pair of prisoners pause near the latrine hut, just long enough to note the shadow angle on the fence. One shadow ends too soon. Not a gap. Not exactly. But a moment. At 16:27, an RAF squadron leader adjusts his scarf and walks a circuit of the compound, ostensibly for exercise. His pace is casual. His eyes are not. He counts again what he already knows, matching it against the guard's joke like a code key sliding into place. The perimeter is strongest where it expects pressure. Weakest where it expects none. The joke had revealed that expectation. At dinner, watery soup is ladled out. Men eat quickly, hungrily as always. No speeches. No signals. But there is a change in posture. Back straighter, movements more deliberate. Purpose has weight. After evening appel, the temperature drops sharply. Guards huddle in coats, rifles slung tighter now. One of them complains about the cold. Another laughs. No one jokes this time. Lights go out at 2200 hours. The camp settles into darkness punctured by tower lamps and distant forest wind. In Hut 104, blankets shift. A man rolls onto his side and stares at the wall. He waits. At 22:19, a soft scrape comes from beneath the floor. What? Then nothing. At 22:41, the stove is nudged slightly, masking a second sound. Someone coughs on purpose. Another turns in his bunk, groaning as if dreaming. Below, the tunnel breathes. Not air, possibility. The realization is complete now. Not hope. Not yet. Something sharper. More dangerous. A shared understanding that the rules have changed without the guards noticing. This is the most fragile moment. Because realization forces a choice. Do nothing and live. Or act, and risk everything. At 23:03, a guard pauses outside Hut 104 longer than usual. He shifts his weight. Looks at the door. Listens. Inside no one moves. The guard shrugs and walks on, boots fading into the dark. Under the floor, a hand tightens into a fist. The decision has been made. And once made, it cannot be undone. The quiet conspiracy. Night does not fall on Stalag Luft 3. It presses down. The darkness is never complete. Never allowed to be. Arc lamps burn from the towers, pale cones of light slicing the compound into zones of safety and death. Shadows here are measured, catalogued, obeyed. Anything that moves where it shouldn't is noticed. Usually. Inside the huts, sleep is performed, not taken. Men lie still with eyes open, listening to the camp breathe. Wood pops as it contracts in the cold. Somewhere a guard clears his throat. Farther off, a dog barks once and is silent. Beneath Hut 104 the earth smells different. Damp. Metallic. Alive. A man works on his knees in near total darkness, guided by touch alone. His fingers trace the tunnel wall, feeling for weakness, for vibration. Every movement is slow, deliberate, rehearsed 1,000 times in his head. A tin can slides forward filled with sand. It does not clink. It never does. He pauses. Counts. Above him, a prisoner turns over in his bunk, muttering something meaningless in his sleep. The sound is intentional. Cover. The man below exhales and continues. At 0:31 in another hut, a candle is lit for exactly 12 seconds. Not for light. For confirmation. A signal so small it could be coincidence. The flame dies. Darkness returns. That is enough. The conspiracy does not meet. It doesn't need to. There are no circles of men hunched over maps, no whispered oaths. That would be too obvious. Too dangerous. Instead, it moves through habit. A man volunteers for garbage duty, knowing which path takes him closest to the fence. Another trades cigarettes not for food but for a belt, leather that can be cut, braided, repurposed. A third intentionally loses a spoon during inspection, already accounting for the spare hidden behind a wall beam. Each action alone means nothing. Together they mean everything. By 2 o'clock, the camp has settled into its deepest quiet. Guards retreat inward, drawn toward stoves and shelter. Patrols slow. Boots drag. Rifles are shifted from ready to resting. Complacency has weight. It presses guards into routine as surely as fear presses prisoners into patience. In Hut 104, a senior officer sits up slowly, careful not to disturb the others. He does not look down. He looks at the door as if measuring it. He whispers a single word. Barely audible. Now. Under the floor, the tunnel opens its mouth. A board is lifted. Hands appear, dirty, raw, shaking despite discipline. The first man emerges like a shadow peeling itself from the earth. He does not stand. He crawls to the wall and freezes, listening. 30 seconds. Nothing. The second man follows. Then the third. Each carries something small. Each knows exactly where it goes. At 2:17, a coat is hung slightly differently on a peg, altering a silhouette just enough to block a sliver of light from the window. Someone else nudges a stove leg, producing a dull scrape masked instantly by a cough. The choreography is flawless. Outside, a guard lights a cigarette. The flare briefly illuminates his face, young, tired, unconcerned. He laughs at something said from the tower and turns his back on the huts. That matters more than he knows. At the fence line, snow crunches softly. A lone prisoner moves with the stiffness of someone who belongs nowhere near freedom. His coat is wrong. His posture is wrong. Everything about him would scream danger, if anyone were really looking. No one is. He reaches a point just short of the wire and stops. Waits. Watches the tower light sweep past, then away. A second figure joins him. Then a third. They do not speak. They do not touch. They wait for the gap that exists only because a joke convinced a guard that it didn't matter. At 2:41 the light shifts. Not much. Enough. The first man moves. He slides under the lowest strand where the earth has been worn thin by months of boots. Boots that never expected traffic going the other direction. The wire hums faintly but does not sing. He freezes, breath locked in his chest. The alarm does not sound. Behind him, the second man follows. Then the third. Back in the huts, men roll over, mutter, cough. A blanket falls to the floor, on purpose. Someone kicks it, swears quietly, drawing a guard's irritated glance that never reaches the fence. At 3:02, a patrol passes closer than planned. Too close. The men beyond the wire flatten into the snow, faces pressed down, bodies rigid. A boot heel crunches inches away. A flashlight beam schemes the ground, pauses, then moves on. The patrol continues. No alarm. A breath is released. Slow. Silent. But the conspiracy has reached the point of no return. Each man who slips through makes the next decision heavier. The count is rising. The night is thinning. And somewhere between the huts and the forest, a guard shifts his weight and frowns. Not because he sees something wrong but because for the first time something feels different. At 3:19 he turns his head toward the wire. And the escape holds its breath. The break in the pattern. 3:21 hours. A tower light hesitates. Not a full stop. Not an alarm. Just a fraction of a second longer on its sweep, like an eye lingering on a thought it can't quite form. The guard inside the tower shifts, squinting through frost-smeared glass. He tells himself it's nothing. Fatigue plays tricks at this hour. Below him the camp remains still. Too still. Beyond the wire, 3 men lie pressed into the snow, hearts pounding so hard they expect the sound to travel. They do not look at each other. Looking would acknowledge how close this is to failure. They stare at the ground and wait for the light to pass. It does. The sweep continues on its arc, obedient, predictable. That is the opening. The first man moves again, not fast, not slow. Precise. He rises into a crouch and glides forward, boots placed heel to toe to minimize sound. The snow is thin here, wind scoured down to frozen earth. A blessing. A curse. Less noise but no forgiveness if he stumbles. He reaches the treeline and disappears. One by one, others follow, spaced just enough apart to look like nothing at all from a distance. Not a group. Not a pattern. Just absence. Inside Hut 104 the atmosphere has changed. Men are awake now, though many pretend otherwise. A blanket is adjusted. A cap pulled lower. A man sits up, rubs his eyes and mutters about the cold. All of it is theater, performed for ears that may or may not be listening. At 3:33 a guard stops outside the hut. He taps the door frame with his knuckles, not hard enough to be official. Just enough to assert presence. No one reacts. The guard shrugs and moves on. Routine reasserts itself even as it begins to fracture. At the latrine hut, a prisoner takes longer than necessary, shuffling, hunched, playing the role of a man with nothing left to do but obey. He counts silently. 10 seconds. 20. 30. When he exits, another enters immediately, blocking the line of sight for just long enough. That delay matters. Near the fence, another gap opens. A man slips through with a quiet grunt of effort and vanishes into the dark. The wire vibrates slightly longer this time. A risk. An unnecessary one. Somewhere a guard pauses, head tilting, listening. Nothing. The wire settles. By 3:47 the escape is no longer an idea. It's a process. A flow. Men moving not toward freedom but away from captivity, an important distinction. Freedom is abstract. Distance is measurable. Inside the compound the count is already wrong. Not by much. One here. One there. A number that will not be noticed until it matters. And by then it will be too late. At 4:01, the eastern horizon begins to thin, the black giving way to a bruised gray. Dawn is coming. That was never part of the plan. Dawn changes everything. Shadows shorten. Details sharpen. The forest that offered protection at night becomes a maze of exposure by day. The men outside the wire feel it instinctively, picking up pace without running, spreading wider, breaking the invisible thread that connects them. Inside a watchtower, a guard checks his watch and frowns. He adjusts his scarf and stamps his feet, scanning the perimeter with renewed attention. The cold is biting now, sharper than before. It irritates him. Makes him alert. He looks toward the huts. At 4:06, a door opens when it shouldn't. A prisoner steps out, blinking exaggeratedly, arms wrapped around himself. He looks confused, lost, vulnerable. The guard snaps at him in German, ordering him back inside. The prisoner nods apologetically and retreats, slow enough to draw the guard's attention just a second longer. That second saves lives. At the fence, a man misjudges the timing. The light catches him mid-step, freezing him in a cone of white. His breath catches. Every instinct screams to run. He does not. He lowers himself, slowly, painfully, becoming a shadow shaped like a man. The guard in the tower squints again. This time he isn't sure. He reaches for the searchlight controls, fingers stiff with cold. The beam tightens, brightens, creeping back toward the shape near the ground. Inside Hut 104, a senior officer senses it without seeing it. He stands abruptly, knocking his elbow into a bunk frame. The sound rings out, too loud. A man curses. Another laughs. Someone starts a mock argument about stolen socks. Voices rise just enough, chaotic, human, distracting. The guard's attention flickers. The light drifts away. The man at the fence exhales and moves, faster now, slipping into darkness that feels suddenly thin and fragile. At 4:19, the first hint of trouble reaches the compound, not as certainty but as discomfort. A Feldwebel walking his round realizes he has walked past the same hut twice. He stops. Looks around. Counts towers. Counts steps. Something is off. He radios the tower nearest the east fence. The response comes back casual. No sightings. No disturbances. All clear. The Feldwebel isn't convinced. He changes direction, heading toward the perimeter, not running, not yet. Just walking with purpose. Inside the forest, men push forward, lungs burning, muscles screaming after years of confinement. They do not look back. Looking back invites doubt. Doubt is fatal. At 4:27, the Feldwebel reaches the wire. He kneels, gloved hand hovering inches above the ground. The snow here is disturbed. Not much. Just enough. A footprint softened by wind but unmistakably human. His jaw tightens. He stands and looks toward the huts, then toward the trees. At 4:29 he raises his whistle. Inside the camp, time snaps tight like a drawn wire. Because once that whistle blows, everything changes, and there will be no more silence to hide behind. When silence shattered. 4:30 hours. The whistle cuts the air like a blade. Sure. Unmistakable. Sleep, real or performed, dies instantly. Doors slam open along the hut line. Guards snap upright, rifles coming off shoulders, boots pounding frozen ground with sudden purpose. Orders spill into the cold and clipped German, overlapping, contradicting, accelerating. Alarm bells follow. Too late. In Hut 104, men are already moving, but not toward the exits. Toward normality. Toward chaos that looks accidental. A stove is knocked over. Someone shouts about a missing coat. Another claims a man collapsed. Confusion blooms on cue, loud and human and useless to command. Outside, the Feldwebel gestures violently toward the fence. Two guards sprint past him, breath steaming, fear finally replacing boredom. A flashlight beam snaps on, stabbing through the half-light of dawn. It finds the wire. Bet. Not broken. Bet. That is worse. Alarm stuff, someone yells. The searchlights widen their arcs, no longer sweeping but hunting. White cones crash into the forest edge, shredding the shadows that had protected the escape moments ago. Snow explodes under light. Trees become witnesses. Beyond the wire, the men run now, not in panic but with calculation stripped down to instinct. They split without signals, scattering like fragments from a burst shell. One turns east. Two veer south. Another drops flat as a beam schemes past his head. A rifle cracks. Then another. Warning shots. At first. Inside the camp, guards rush prisoners back toward the huts, shouting, striking the air with rifle barrels. The illusion of control collapses into raw force. Count sheets are dropped. Names forgotten. Numbers don't matter anymore. Only recovery. At 4:38, a tower reports movement in the tree line. Coordinates are shouted. A truck engine coughs to life near the gate. Dogs begin barking, late, confused, enraged. Too many seconds lost. In the forest, one man stumbles, catches himself on a sapling and keeps going. His lungs burn. His legs feel unreal as if borrowed from someone else. Behind him voices grow louder, closer. German commands. A dog handler swearing as the animal strains at the leash. Another rifle shot cracks. Closer this time. A man dives behind a fallen log, snow spraying his face. He presses himself flat, heart hammering so hard it drowns out everything else. The beam passes inches over his boots, pauses, then moves on. What? Nothing more. Back at the wire, guards swarm the breach. Someone drops to a knee inspecting the ground. Footprints everywhere now, ruined by boots, confusion, urgency. The clarity of discovery is gone, replaced by frantic reaction. A radio crackles. Headquarters demands numbers. How many escape? The answer is wrong no matter what they say. At 4:45, the gates swing open. Trucks roll out, engines roaring into the forest roads, headlights stabbing through trees. Orders escalate. Capture is no longer enough. This has become a hunt. Inside the huts, prisoners sit where they're told, faces blank, hands folded. Some genuinely terrified. Some quietly counting in their heads, subtracting names, imagining directions, mapping chances. No one meets a guard's eyes for long. One young German private does. His face is pale now. The confidence of the joke is gone, replaced by a creeping realization that something irreversible has happened on his watch. He grips his rifle too tightly, knuckles white. At 4:52, the first captured escapee is dragged back through the gate. Muddy, breathless, eyes blazing with something that is not defeat. Guards shout at him. He doesn't answer. The sight ripples through the camp. Not fear. Resolve. Because for every man brought back, others are still out there. Moving. Hiding. Learning the forest as fast as the forest is learning them. In the trees, the hunt spreads wide, stretching resources thin. Commands overlap. Units cross paths. Tracks are lost, found, lost again. Dawn sharpens the world, but it also reveals how vast it is. At 5:07, A truck skids to a halt near a frozen stream. Guards fan out, rifles raised, breath ragged. A dog pulls hard to the left, then stops, confused by water. The trail breaks. Inside the camp, roll call begins again, an emergency count under screaming voices and shaking hands. Numbers don't match. They recount. Still wrong. More whistles. More shouting. The realization hits command like a physical blow. This isn't a minor breach. This isn't a few men. This is catastrophic. And as the sun finally clears the horizon, casting pale light over wire, snow and footprints leading everywhere and nowhere, one truth becomes unavoidable. The escape has succeeded, not because every man will be free but because the camp will never be the same again. And the consequences of that last joke are only just beginning to unfold. The hunt without edges. 5:18 hours. Morning arrives without mercy. The forest is no longer black, it is gray and endless, branches etched sharp against a whitening sky. Breath hangs visible now, betraying movement. Snow that once hid footsteps turns traitor under light, revealing trails that twist, split, vanish, then reappear where no one expects them. German patrols fan outward in widening arcs. Feldgrau coats cut through the trees. Orders are relayed by hand signal and short bursts of radio chatter. Units are reassigned on the fly, this road, that creek, the ridgeline to the north. Efficiency returns, but it arrives late and angry. Inside a truck bouncing along a frozen logging road, a lieutenant scans a folded map with a gloved finger. He knows this terrain. Or thought he did. The men who fled know something better, how to disappear. In the forest, disappearance is a skill. One escapee drops into a drainage ditch and follows it for half a kilometer, boots soaked, teeth clenched. Another backtracks deliberately, stepping in his own prints until the trail ends in a scuffed circle of indecision. A third tears his scarf into strips and leaves them snagged on thorns, false breadcrumbs meant to draw dogs off course. It works. Briefly. At 5:41, a patrol converges on a stand of pines where tracks are fresh. Rifles up. Breath held. A handler releases the dog and it surges forward, then hesitates, confused by the swirl of human scent layered over itself. The handler curses softly. The delay costs minutes. Minutes cost ground. Elsewhere, a man crawls beneath a fallen spruce, needles pressing into his cheek. He counts heartbeats as boots pass close enough to see the mud on the soles. He does not move. Not when a branch snaps. Not when a voice calls out. He stays stone still until the sound thins and the forest resumes breathing. At 6:03 the hunt widens again. Roadblocks go up on the nearest routes. A bicycle patrol pedals hard, breath fogging, eyes scanning ditches and hedgerows. A train is halted outside a small village. Gendarmes question passengers with irritation and haste. Papers are checked. Accents weighed. Eyes linger. The escapees understand the clock now. Night was protection. Day is exposure. Every step forward must earn its risk. One man reaches a stream and follows it downstream, boots in water to kill scent. The cold bites through leather and skin, numbing pain into something manageable. He emerges 100 meters later, shivering violently, but smiling despite himself. The trick is old. It still works. Inside the camp, the count drags on. Names are shouted. Hands raised. Heads counted again. Officers argue numbers at the edge of the Appellplatz, frustration sharpening their voices. A major demands clarity. A clerk stammers. The math refuses to behave. By 6:19, command understands the scale. The response hardens. No more assumption. No more routine. The forest fills with movement. Boots, dogs, trucks, horses pressed into service from nearby farms. The sound travels far now, echoing through valleys and over ridges, announcing intent to anyone listening. The escapees listen. They listen and adjust. A pair splits without a word when they hear engines. One heads uphill, lungs burning. The other drops down, trusting gravity and brush to hide him. Both are right. Both are wrong. Survival is probability, not certainty. At 6:44, a patrol stumbles onto a discarded jacket. Warm. Recently shed. A clue and a lie at once. The lieutenant orders a sweep, then hesitates, sensing the trap too late. The real trail has already crossed the road behind them. In a thicket, a man stops and presses his forehead to the bark of a birch, grounding himself. He thinks of nothing that might slow him. Not home. Not freedom. Only the next 10 steps. Only breath and balance. Shots ring out somewhere distant, not close enough to define, not far enough to ignore. The forest seems to recoil, birds lifting in sudden waves. Word spreads through the patrols. Contact. Maybe. The truth is murkier. Always is. At 7:02, a truck skids on ice and slams to a halt, blocking a narrow lane. Guards pile out, angry and disorganized. The delay cascades. Another minute lost. Another gap opens. Inside a small village, a woman hangs laundry and notices a figure pass between barns, moving wrong for a farmer at that hour. She freezes, heart pounding. The figure meets her eyes once, pleading, desperate, human, then vanishes behind a wall. She waits a long moment before lowering the sheet. When she does, her hands are shaking. She says nothing. Not every witness chooses a side. By 7:28, fatigue starts to creep into the hunt. Adrenaline burns fast. The forest demands payment. Orders are repeated. Routes overlapped. Men begin to second-guess directions that felt certain minutes ago. The escapees feel it too. Legs heavy. Throats raw. But momentum is a weapon now. Stopping means capture. Moving means chance. At 7:51, a dog finally locks onto a clean trail. The handler grins grimly. This time it's real. The line pulls tight. The chase accelerates. Ahead, the man hears it, the change in cadence, the certainty. He veers hard, tearing through brush, then drops flat and rolls into a culvert beneath a narrow road. Mud coats his coat. He presses himself into the cold stone and waits. The dog overshoots. The handler curses. Boots thunder past. Silence returns like a held breath released. Back at Stalag Luft 3, the compound is locked down. Wire hums with tension. Guards glare at prisoners as if sight alone could extract answers. No one speaks. The joke is no longer funny. It is poisonous. At 8:12, reports trickle in, conflicting, incomplete. Some escapes confirmed stopped. Others unknown. Command wants certainty. The forest refuses to provide it. Because the hunt has lost its edge. Not all at once. But enough. Somewhere beyond the next ridge, a man slows to a walk and allows himself one look back, not to the camp, but to the trees he has learned in a single brutal hour. He does not smile. He does not celebrate. He simply keeps moving. The deadliest part of the escape is not the running. It is what comes after, when the forest thins, the roads converge, and choices narrow to a single line. And that moment is approaching fast. The cost of freedom. 9:03 hours. The forest begins to thin. Not abruptly, nothing here does, but gradually, treacherously. Pines give way to scrub. Scrub to hedgerows. The kind of land that looks harmless until you realize how far sound travels when trees no longer catch it. For the escapees still moving, this is the most dangerous phase. Running was easier. Hiding was clearer. Now comes blending. One man stops at the edge of a field and studies it like an enemy position. Frost sparkles on the grass. A narrow dirt road cuts across the far side, rutted and quiet. Beyond it, a cluster of buildings, farm structures maybe, sits low against the horizon. Civilization. Also exposure. He adjusts his coat, tucks his hands deep into his pockets and walks. Not like a fugitive. Like someone who belongs nowhere in particular. Each step is measured. Casual. He keeps his gaze down just enough. Halfway across he hears an engine. A motorcycle. The sound grows fast, wrong, approaching from behind the hedgerow. He does not turn. Turning would betray him. He continues walking, heartbeat hammering, rehearsing a lie in a language he barely speaks. The motorcycle bursts into view, Wehrmacht markings clear against mud-splashed metal. The rider slows, scanning. Their eyes meet for a fraction of a second. Long enough for judgment, not long enough for certainty. The rider hesitates, then accelerates past. The man keeps walking. Only when the engine fades does he allow his shoulders to drop a centimeter. Luck again. But luck is thinning. At 9:17, a roadblock tightens near a crossroads. Soldiers check carts, bicycles, pedestrians. Papers are demanded. Accents weighed. Hands watched. The escapees feel the noose drawing in mile by mile. One pair makes the fatal mistake of staying together too long. They reach a ditch and hesitate just a second, arguing in whispers about direction. That second costs them. A patrol crests the rise, rifles raised, orders shouted. They run. They don't get far. The sound of the shots carries, sharp and final in the open air. Elsewhere, men flinch, knowing without seeing. The cost has been paid again. By 9:34, trucks ferrying captured escapees begin returning to the camp. Faces are blank. Some stare ahead. Others close their eyes. A guard mutters about examples. Another tells him to shut up. Inside Stalag Luft 3, prisoners watch through slits in the huts, counting trucks, counting silhouettes. Each arrival tightens something in their chests, but not in the way the guards expect. It doesn't break resolve. It hardens it, because every truck means others are still missing. In the countryside, a woman opens a barn door to find a man collapsed against a bale of hay, chest heaving, eyes wild. She freezes. He raises his hands slowly, palms out, not surrender but pleading. She looks at his face. Thin, young, terrified. She nods once. The door closes. Inside the barn, time stretches thin. She brings water in a chipped mug. A piece of bread. She does not ask questions. He does not thank her out loud. Gratitude is understood. At 10:02, a patrol passes the barn road. The woman stands outside, scolding a child loudly for tracking mud across the yard. The patrol barely glances her way. The barn stays closed. Elsewhere, choices turn lethal. An escapee attempts to board a freight train, misjudging the guard's spacing. He is spotted instantly. Shouted down. He jumps anyway, hitting hard, rolling into gravel. The train screeches. Men shout. He doesn't get up. The story travels fast, even without words. By 10:41, command consolidates the hunt. The outer ring tightens. Aircraft are discussed, then dismissed. Too visible, too slow to coordinate. The net must be human. Relentless. A captain studies reports and realizes something unsettling. The prisoners are not behaving like panicked men. They are adapting. Learning. Making decisions that suggest planning deeper than expected. The joke did more than reveal a weakness. It revealed underestimation. At 11:18, one escapee reaches a village churchyard and pauses behind a stone wall. Bells begin to ring. Sunday. The sound washes over him, alien and almost painful. He blends into a small knot of parishioners, head bowed, lips moving without sound. Faith is a disguise like any other. The patrol that arrives minutes later hesitates. Searching a churchyard during service draws eyes. Questions. Records. They move on. At the camp, midday roll call is conducted under armed guard, rifles level, tempers short. The numbers still refuse to reconcile. Every recount ends with the same uncomfortable gap. Someone says it quietly, almost to themselves. They got out. Not all. Not enough. But some. And some is a wound that won't close. By 12:07, the hunt begins to fracture under its own weight. Men are tired. Reports contradict. The forest has given up what it will give easily. What remains will cost more time, more lives, more certainty. Somewhere on a back road, a man walks with a limp he cannot hide anymore. He knows the odds narrowing. He also knows this, even if he is caught now, the attempt mattered. It changed the equation. At 12:39, a Feldwebel radios in a final update before noon. Several escapees accounted for. Others presumed still at large. Orders come back clipped, frustrated. Contain. Capture. Punish. The words echo. But beyond the net, beyond the next hill, a man reaches a safe house arranged by strangers who share no language with him but understand the stakes. He steps inside, the door closing softly behind him. For the first time since the wire he sits. Not to rest. To breathe. Back at Stalag Luft 3, guards resume their rounds with new rigidity. Floodlights are adjusted. Procedures rewritten in anger. A young private stares at the wire, replaying his own laughter in his head until it curdles. The cost of freedom is no longer abstract. It has faces. It has names. And by nightfall it will demand an answer. Aftermath written in silence. 1946 hours. Night returns to Stalag Luft 3 heavier than before. The arc lamps burn brighter now, newly adjusted, their light harsher, less forgiving. Shadows have been recalculated. Distances remeasured. The camp looks the same, but it is no longer familiar. Routine has been wounded, and wounded systems lash out. Prisoners stand for evening roll call under tighter guard. Rifles are no longer slung. They are held. Faces are harder. Voices shorter. Names are called with impatience that borders on fear. When the count ends, the gap remains, smaller now but undeniable. Command knows the truth. Some are gone. Orders arrive just after sunset. Collective punishment. Restrictions. Privileges revoked. Men are marched back to huts under watchful eyes. The message is clear. This will not be allowed to happen again. But messages work both ways. Inside Hut 104, men sit in silence broken only by the creak of wood and the distant hum of generators. No one celebrates. No one boasts. Celebration would cheapen the cost already paid. Instead, they listen, To the camp, to each other's breathing, to the absence of boots that should be there and aren't. Absence can be loud. A senior officer removes his cap and sets it on his knee. He stares at the floor where the tunnel mouth once breathed. It is sealed now. Gone. As if it never existed. He allows himself one slow nod, not for success but for courage. Beyond the wire, beyond the forest, night settles over roads and villages that look ordinary again. Somewhere in that darkness, men move quietly, guided by whispers, hand signals, and the kindness, or indifference, of strangers. Each step forward stretches the distance between what they were and what they might become. Not freedom yet, but momentum. Back at the camp, a young German private takes his post. He stands straighter than he did yesterday. He does not joke. He scans the wire obsessively, replaying a moment he cannot undo. A laugh, a sentence, a certainty that nothing could change. It did. The officers write reports late into the night. Words like breach, failure, discipline repeat on the page. No one writes arrogance. No one needs to. In the huts, prisoners lie awake, staring at ceilings, imagining forests, fields, rivers crossed in darkness. For some, the imagining is all that will ever be. For others, it is a memory still unfolding. That is the cruel symmetry of escape. At 2311, the camp finally settles. Guards resume their patrols. Boots fall into rhythm again. The machine grinds on, repaired but scarred. History, however, does not forget the scar. Because this was not just an escape. It was a rupture. A moment when discipline, patience, and secrecy overcame wire, towers, and certainty. When a careless joke revealed that even the strongest systems depend on human belief. And belief is fragile. Long after the searchlights dim and the reports are filed away, the story will remain, not as legend but as warning. In war, overconfidence kills quietly. Sometimes with a laugh. Sometimes with a sentence. Sometimes by giving prisoners exactly what they need most. A reason to move.